Bitcoin matters.
So in this week's episode, I'd like to start out with a personal observation. I spend a lot of time trying to understand Bitcoin and what it is. And I realize that much of my understanding of it is fairly superficial. So, I've thought of Bitcoin as this type of money. It's like sound money. And it definitely has, in my opinion, that property. But that doesn't help me explain it to someone who doesn't know anything about it. And when someone who doesn't know anything about Bitcoin asks me about it, they normally only want to know two things. Should I buy some? And, why? So needless to say, an in-depth explanation of what Bitcoin is technically, or what is a Bitcoin, is usually not warranted. 99% of the general population just does not care about these things. And frankly, why should they? How does learning about public key cryptography and SHA-256 hash functions help the father of five reach his goal of creating a nest egg for his family in case of hard times? It doesn't. So with that, Akin, I'd kind of like to jump into our first question here. You're a software developer, you run Azteco, which is a voucher service for Bitcoin, and you have a better understanding of Bitcoin than probably 99.9% of the general population. So let me posit a hypothetical to you. Imagine you are riding on a train next to a complete stranger, and during your trip, you strike up a conversation with the stranger. And eventually the topic of Bitcoin comes up. And at that point, the stranger asks you, okay, so just what exactly is Bitcoin anyway? Akin, how do you answer this question?
That's a very good question. It's a question that we get asked quite often. In layman terms, Bitcoin is identical to text messaging, only instead of sending whatever text you like, you can only send a number. And those numbers are called Bitcoin. There's a limited number of Bitcoin, and so you can use these text messages as money. No single person controls how much Bitcoin there is. That's why it can be used as money. Anyone can download a Bitcoin app onto their phone and start using it to buy things online or take it for doing work for others. It works all year round. You never need to go to a bank or a third party to send or receive it, and it's dead simple to use. And so if you keep the description of Bitcoin to that, that's all anybody needs to be able to use it. It's the same as WhatsApp. If you want somebody to be on WhatsApp so that you can communicate with them, you say, go get WhatsApp, and then I can send you messages, and it won't cost me anything to text you. This is the only sales pitch that's required for WhatsApp. And so once you get your contacts into WhatsApp, you immediately save money by not having to send SMSs over your phone's GSM network. This is exactly how Bitcoin needs to be promoted to the public. Any talk about savings, investment, the gubbins and gears of how Bitcoin works are absolutely irrelevant and incomprehensible to most people who will ever use Bitcoin. So if our interest is to make Bitcoin a global phenomenon, which is used by billions of people, any hope of making them understand the gears underneath Bitcoin is off the table. Nobody understands anything about SSL, GPG, how HTTP works, or HTTPS for that matter. Nobody understands or cares about that. They just want to get things done. And Bitcoin has to move into that mode. When I say Bitcoin, I mean Bitcoin developers, Bitcoin companies. They've got to get into that mode of thinking where they're doing all the thinking for the consumer, and the consumer is just using it and enjoying it and taking advantage of it.
Okay, so let me pretend I'm the stranger. So I hear you say this, and I'm thinking, okay, wait. So if Bitcoin is just another text message service like SMS or Twitter or WhatsApp, whatever, how is it worth anything at all? Why are people using this as money? Because my texts aren't worth anything. My tweets aren't worth anything. What's the deal with that?
The reason why a Bitcoin message can have a value in the market as a means of paying for something is because the supply of them is limited. When you make a message on Twitter, WhatsApp, or any other messaging service, there's an unlimited number of messages that can be made that are unique to you, but infinitely reproducible. With Bitcoin, the numbers you receive on your coin are not reproducible. They're limited in number. So it's like having a limited object, physical object, that is still a digital thing. And so that's the breakthrough that caused Bitcoin to be so exciting and so amazing. Somebody found out a way to make something that's naturally abundant scarce. That's why Bitcoin can be a replacement or act in lieu of money when it is in fact totally digital. And when we talk about this, we've got to understand that Bitcoin is a database. It's a database with entries on it that you can buy entries on. And there's a limited number of those entries. It's still a database, it's still text, and it still has all of the rights and properties associated with text, but it's still text. That's what Bitcoin is. It's a limited database where entries cannot be created at will by anybody who uses it. The computer network controls how many Bitcoin there are, and it keeps track of who is in control of every Bitcoin. That's a broad overview of how it works, and it makes the distinction. It allows us to make the distinction between Twitter, WhatsApp, and all other messaging services where the digital nature of those services allow you to have an infinitely replicable message that is worth zero.
Okay, so if that's the case, why is Bitcoin the superior cryptocurrency compared to any of these others services out there? If they're all in essence similar, if you think of them like text messaging and they're all text message services, why is Bitcoin the one that's to be the money that the market adopts?
First of all, if you want to send WhatsApp messages to other WhatsApp users, you have to have the WhatsApp app. Otherwise, you can't communicate with them. So if you want to send Bitcoin to somebody else, you've got to get on Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin is the first and biggest network, if you want to send money on Bitcoin, you have to be on Bitcoin. That's the first thing. Secondly, all these other altcoins and derivatives of Bitcoin are literally that, derivatives of Bitcoin. So they come second after Bitcoin, and they're technically inferior. And also take this into account. On the internet, every single message you send is controlled and mediated by a set of rules. Everybody agrees to follow those rules so that you can send and receive email to and from anywhere or any email user. If you have another network, which is an altcoin network, they're following a different set of rules. And so you can't send Bitcoin to an altcoin and vice versa. Everybody has to be on the same network for the network to be valuable. That's why, and this is completely separate from the technical issues of the who's developing it, the software that's being done, etc. If Bitcoin is to be the money of the internet, everybody has to be on that, and it can't be fractured. So you can't have two competing email protocols or email systems on the same network. Everybody has to be on the same protocol for email to be in any way commercially viable. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. Now, some people have downloaded the Bitcoin software, taken out the name Bitcoin and put their own name there, but that doesn't mean it's Bitcoin. It doesn't mean they can improve on it. It doesn't mean it's going to have the same network effects. And just because somebody on an exchange is buying it and selling it and playing around with it, that doesn't mean that it has the same utility as Bitcoin. Bitcoin's utility comes from the size of the network. It's the first mover, has first mover advantage, and it is going to be the base layer money protocol for the entire world. So by all means, you can play around with altcoins. You can even make a profit trading them on an exchange, but that's not a substitute for the reality that there's only Bitcoin and only Bitcoin matters.
So I think many people might be skeptical thinking about this idea that, well, Bitcoin is just this text message money. What are your thoughts on why Bitcoin is currently the best solution we have to the problem of inflation and fiat currencies?
People can be skeptical all they like. Skepticism doesn't negate reality. There is a reality, and you are compelled to go along with it. If you jump off a cliff, you're going to fall down and go splat like Wile E. Coyote. So people can be skeptical all they like. They can hold any opinion they like. It doesn't change reality. And we've seen this over the 10 years that Bitcoin has been running. There have been many people who say they're skeptical of it. This just shows that they don't understand what they're talking about. It is irrational to say you're skeptical about arithmetic. 1 + 1 = 2. It always equals 2. You would find it ridiculous that somebody would come up to you and say, I'm skeptical that 1+1 = 2, but essentially that's what they're saying when they say they're skeptical of Bitcoin. You can't be skeptical of reality. You can't be skeptical about math. Math is real. Reality is real. Gravity pulls down, and Bitcoin is the base layer protocol, and it will be the base layer protocol for money on the internet. Simple fact. And I'm quite sure that in 20 years, there will still be people saying that there's some objection to Bitcoin. It'll be a novel objection, one we haven't heard. Actually, it might not be because they're not very intelligent. But there are going to be objections going forward. They're never going to stop being objections. We're just going to have to learn to live with these people who eventually will be made quiet by the fact that everybody is using Bitcoin. Look at Paul Krugman and Clifford Stoll, two men who both said the internet will never come of anything. And now we're talking on the internet, and reality doesn't care about Paul Krugman or Clifford Stoll. The market doesn't either. The market is going to select Bitcoin because it is the best money that man has ever had since the gold standard. That's a fact. It's a fact just like gravity is a fact, or that 1+1 = 2. It doesn't matter what Paul Krugman or Clifford Stoll or any of these naysayers say. None of these people develop software. None of them understand software. None of them understand the problem that Bitcoin solves in the same way that Paul Krugman didn't understand the potential of the internet to create things like Twitter, Facebook, and all the other tools that everybody takes for granted now. You must understand the limitations of these men. You must understand history. You must have some overview of history to know what these people are saying is absolutely incorrect. And once you have that, what they're saying is obviously it's ridiculous.
Okay, with all this in mind, how do you envision Bitcoin, which is this text message monetary system, how do you envision this being adopted by the world as money, as the base layer currency? Describe what that process looks like to you, and what is the world going to even look like in 10 years once we've adopted this monetary standard that the entire world will use?
Well, first of all, we need to categorize the tool correctly. It's not money. It's not a monetary standard. It's a database. It's a database with limited entries that are protected by a set of software tools that mean that the system cannot be gamed or corrupted. That's the first thing. And once you take that as your starting point, then you can start to extrapolate and say how you think things are going to play out. On the most minimum level, people will be using Bitcoin for every conceivable possible transaction. They'll be doing it with their mobile phones, they'll be doing it with their tablets. Everywhere will be accepting Bitcoin, and it will be an absolutely huge industry. And this will be true even if it serves the underserved, never mind people in the first world. So there's going to be a lot of changes in how people pay for things online and how people pay each other. It'll be all done on simple applications. It will be out of anybody's control, and it will be a huge market, the likes of which has never been seen in any single financial entity. It's going to be bigger than any single bank. You can be absolutely sure of that. And as for the price of Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin can only go up if this comes to pass. It's not possible that the price of Bitcoin goes down and it is adopted as a worldwide settlement layer and peer-to-peer currency for the so-called normie. So while I'm loath to make predictions about the price of Bitcoin, because the price of Bitcoin actually doesn't matter, there is no way that it cannot go up, because the limited supply of Bitcoin and the unlimited supply of fiat that's chasing that Bitcoin means that the nominal value denominated in fiat must go up. And then on top of all that, it's a question of building the applications, some of which we can imagine quite easily and others that we can't. And that work is ongoing. It's going to take a long time to build that software. It's very difficult to do, but it is being done and it will happen. And what anybody says about Bitcoin not working, or that it has no potential, or that it's going to be stopped by the government, et cetera, they don't know what they're talking about. Because if there's one place on earth where Bitcoin is being developed and the applications are being sent out into the world, that means Bitcoin is a success. Bitcoin is already a success after 10 years of flawless operation. So it's only going to get bigger. It's only going to get more powerful. And as new layers are developed on top of it, new techniques, new very consumer-friendly services like Samurai Wallet and other, the Casa Hodl, it's going to get into everybody's hands, everybody's houses, and become normal, just like WhatsApp is normal. WhatsApp has 1 billion users. There's no reason whatsoever why a single Bitcoin application like Samurai Wallet can also serve 1 billion people. And if you think about that, there's 1 billion people sending messages on Bitcoin. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of business, a lot of services to connect with these people and take their Bitcoin in return for goods and services. It's going to be a huge market. Somebody has to build it. Somebody has to serve it. And it's going to happen. There's no doubt about it.
This week's Q&A question comes from Abu Bakr al-Bagholdi at BitcoinyAbu, who asks, "Hi, Beautyon and Shane. Big fan of the podcast and your writing. Thank you. Do you think there is a chance that Bitcoin simply doesn't catch on fast enough and the block reward will eventually fail to incentivize miners in the absence of a mature fee market? Or that the reduced hash rate would soon restore balance? Or this isn't a problem for whatever reason I am missing? I'm trying to think adversarially about what could go wrong, and a general apathy is the most worrying possibility I can think of. Many thanks."
Well, Mr. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, I think that this question is very interesting, first of all. One thing is for sure, there's no apathy amongst the people building Bitcoin, so you don't have to worry about that. Secondly, the rest of the question is best answered with one other question. Why are you asking this? Why are you asking about block reward and all this other business? If you're not a Bitcoin miner, none of that has anything to do with you. You don't ask these questions about WhatsApp. You don't ask these questions about Facebook or any other services using software. Nobody goes into the technical details of those services. Why not? Why do you think it's appropriate that you're asking technical details about Bitcoin when you're not a software developer or a miner, or you have no exposure risk-wise in the industry of Bitcoin itself? Whether you use Bitcoin or not has nothing to do with any of this stuff. So I ask the question, why are you asking this? And people need to think hard about why they're asking these questions, what they hope to gain from knowing these things. If we were to give you a technical answer right now, how would that help you use Bitcoin? Answer, it wouldn't, because you don't have your hands on the levers in any way. You're just a Bitcoin user. So people need to stop asking these questions about Bitcoin. They need to ask different questions, like what kind of service can I build? How can I get Bitcoin into the hands of more people? What Bitcoin businesses should I be investing in that have prospects for the future as being a unicorn? Those are the sorts of questions that matter, not questions about the technical side that nobody can answer. And when they do answer them, the listeners can't understand. Bitcoin must be treated like any other service on the internet, not as a special thing where people are required to know how it works before they can buy a sandwich with Bitcoin. That's just ridiculous.
Okay, well, we want to thank Abu Bakr al-Bagholdi at BitcoinyAbu for your question this week. We'll be sending you an Azteco voucher. Thank you for tuning in to Bitcoin Matters. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a thumbs up on YouTube or a review in the iTunes store. To learn more about Bitcoin Matters, please visit us at bitcoinmatterspodcast.com.